So I've been thinking about how we would start an episode about Airplane, because there's always a thing where we could just talk and riff amongst ourselves and try and find something. But I mean, if we wanted to quote something from Airplane, that'd be an entirely different thing altogether.
It'd be an entirely different kind of thing.
Yeah. You phrased it weird, AJ, and you've never followed my cue when I've tried to lead this, so I'm not going to give it to you this time. This is vengeance. This is bitterness. This is anger. I'm showing the ugliest part of myself today, AJ, just for you, just for our guests, just for our listeners.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious.
Don't call me Shirley.
Hey!
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Welcome to the Worst of All Possible Worlds, the first and only podcast that calls you Shirley. I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes. And we are so excited today to be joined by a very special guest. She is a longtime transportation journalist, founder and editor of the Transportation Communication newsletter, and host of two transportation podcasts. But you might know her best as the announcement voice of the IRT, numbered New York City subway lines. Please welcome to the show, Bernie Wagenblast.
Well, thank you so much. Glad to be here.
So, Bernie, I just need to tell you that we've had a Pulitzer Prize winner on this podcast. We have had people at the top of their fields in video games, in art analysis, in filmmaking. And my partner has received the news of all of them coming on the show with, somewhat excitement. But when I told them that you were coming on the show, they leapt forward and said, "The voice of my childhood." We are truly so honored to have you here.
Wonderful to be here. It makes me feel old when somebody says I'm the voice of their child.
Their whole life. It's of their whole life. They've been a lifelong New Yorker. It's okay.
I'd love to hear from you just a little bit before we sort of get started on today's topic. Just, tell us a bit of your story.
Radio was something I knew I wanted to do from about fifth grade. So when I was a kid, I wanted to be a news person. So I would go down in my basement. I would just read the newspaper out loud to practice reading. So that was kind of the very beginnings of it, was practicing reading the newspaper out loud. And I went to school, Seton Hall University, because they had a wonderful radio station. Because radio is one of those things you can't learn in a classroom. You can learn history and policy, but to do radio, you have to do it. Mm-hmm. So that was a great place to do it. And I had some fantastic experiences when I was a student there. While I was a student, started working professionally, first, covering city council meetings and board of education meetings, then becoming a newscaster. The big break for me was about a year after I graduated. This company called Shadow Traffic came to New York. They had started in Philly, were in Chicago, but they came to New York, which obviously is the biggest market in the country. And the idea behind Shadow Traffic was they would provide traffic reports to virtually every radio station in the city and in the surrounding suburbs. Oh, wow. And they hired about 7 of us to be their original announcers. I was one of those 7. I couldn't ask for something better. I was on in drive time, which is the most listened to part of the radio broadcast day, morning and afternoon drive time on 2 of the biggest radio stations in New York, 1010 Winds, which was and is an all-news station, and WABC, which was still a music station back then. And it was a great experience. I did that for about 5 years. I figured I'd done just about everything I could do as far as traffic reporting. I wanted to spread my wings a little. And what I wanted to do at that point was I wanted to own my own small town radio station where I could really serve the community, be a member of the Kiwanis and the Rotary and the Chamber of Commerce and all those things. But I knew if I was going to do that, there was one big area that I had a hole in my resume and my experience, and that was the sales side, because, you can serve the community, but if you can't sell ads, you're not going to be staying in business for very long.
Trust us, we know. We've had to take some really weird advertisers to keep this podcast running.
Well, I started that, and what I learned was I am not a salesperson. That is what I learned. I didn't learn how to sell. I learned I am not a salesperson. So I was looking around for something because this was obviously not going to be a long-term solution. And my old boss from Shadow Traffic had been hired by the New York City Department of Transportation to start up their communications center in Long Island City.
Okay.
And he hired me to be one of the people to work with him. So I went over there. That was sort of my first experience working in the public sector. I shortly thereafter joined the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. They had an organization called Transcom, sort of a little bit of a preview of what my life would be when you consider the name of the organization. But it was, again, a great opportunity because we were working with all of the transportation agencies in the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Wow. And that was how I started to get to know some of the people from the MTA. Fast forward to 2009, over a decade after I had left the Port Authority, one of the people from the MTA who I knew when I worked at Transcom was involved with this project called Countdown Clocks that they were going to start deploying. He reached out to me and said, hey, would you be interested in being the voice for this?
Okay.
And I said, sure, sounds like fun. So recorded that, and that was sort of the introduction. The other side, the other hat of being a transportation journalist was we go back to 1996. I remember when I was a student in college thinking, wow, it really would have been cool to have been involved with television when it was first starting up in the 1950s or radio back in the 1930s.
Yeah, getting on the ground floor, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, while it's still being created. But I figured there never would be a new medium being created in my lifetime. So in the 1990s, mid-1990s, AOL came along, dial up. So that was, I figured, oh, this is my opportunity to get in on the ground floor of a new medium.
Yeah.
And I created a newsletter called the Transportation Communications Newsletter that I'm still doing. I'm proud to say it was in place before Google was created. So,
yes.
Wow. Hell yeah.
Was it starting like posting on Usenet and stuff like that?
I think it was a thing called Make Groups was the site that I had used, but it basically went out via email.
Yeah.
After I did that for a few years, other people saw what I was doing and said, hey, would you like to do a similar transportation newsletter for us, obviously directed to a somewhat different audience each time. And now I do about 7 different newsletters. I do, as you mentioned, a couple of podcasts about transportation. So that's how I got involved with the transportation journalism side.
Awesome. And of course, you mentioned a moment ago that Transcom was a preview of coming attractions. I think
we in the biz call that foreshadowing.
I think last year that you came out as a trans woman, is that right?
Yeah, it was January 1st, 2023 that I started publicly living, and I had sent, I'd obviously told family and close friends before that, but I posted on social media a few days before January 1st, letting everybody else know. So it's been a little over a year.
Well, Bernie, what an inspiration to everyone to follow through on their New Year's resolutions. You know what I mean? Like you started that year off right.
When I make a New Year's resolution, I make a New Year's resolution.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of trans listeners.
Wow.
So I guess I'm just kind of curious to hear, if you're willing to talk about a little bit, what that has looked like and felt like for you, as well as just if you have anything that you'd like people to hear or know about what your experience has been like so far.
Sure. Well, I've known I was trans from my earliest memory. So this was not some new revelation that just came up in 2022 and I said, oh, I think I'll transition in 2023. Yeah, right. It's something that I always knew. But growing up in the 1960s and the 1970s, I just did not see any viable way that I could do this and still have any kind of a successful life. So I managed to suppress it. I always was thinking of it. There was not a waking hour of my life that I can think of where I wasn't at least thinking about this. So it was something that was constantly there. I liken it to having a splinter in your finger that you can't get out. You get used to it, but you always know that it's there. And every so often you hit it and it reminds you that it's there and that it's painful. So that was kind of what being trans was like for most of my life. But what changed things for me was and I can give you the exact date, April 21st, 2017.
You got done filing your taxes and you were like, all right.
That's what I need to do. Is there a tax break for this? I don't know.
There should be.
There should be.
I wish. I had heard about this new app that had come out called Face App. And, they were talking about it and joking about it on some of the late night TV shows. And they were doing NFL quarterbacks, showing what they might look like if they were women. And I had seen other things in the past, and it was always really poor. It would put a wig on your head and maybe paint your lips red or something stupid like that. And I really wasn't expecting a lot. But I uploaded one of my photos, and when I saw it, it just blew me away because for the first time, I saw what I felt was a realistic representation of what I might look like had I been born female. I saw a resemblance to my mom that I had never noticed before, and that just sort of started the ball rolling. And there were a lot of big things and little things that I did between that date in 2017 and when I finally socially transitioned January 1st of last year. Everything from I went to Walmart and bought a pair of women's sneakers. They didn't look any different from men's sneakers. They were black sneakers. There was nothing about them, but just knowing that they were being marketed as women's sneakers and that they were in women's sizes made me feel good. And everything I was doing was pretty much invisible to everybody else. Even fairly major things like I legally changed my name to Bernie. It's the name I've always gone by, and it was short for Bernard, but that name I only used when I had to legally. But everybody knew me as Bernie. So I figured, well, Bernie can be short for Bernadette. And I figured, okay, well, that's, again, something that I can do that just will feel good for myself. Nobody else will necessarily notice this, but it was right. So that was, again, a lot of small and big things that took place up into that social transition. And the past year has been one filled with adventure. But I think for most trans people, when they transition, there's a lot of trepidation, a lot of fear. What is this going to be like? Am I going to lose all my friends? Am I going to lose my job? What's going to happen? And for the most part, I have been pleasantly surprised by everything that's happened.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm sure our listeners will really get a kick out of that. Thank you, Bernie, for sharing that. We're here today to talk about a uproarious comedy from that inspiring tale into something that is
it's inspiring in its own way.
It is inspiring in its own way, I suppose. In the film Airplane, which is widely considered to be, I think, maybe one of the funniest movies of all time.
And this is also a movie that I've been wanting to talk about on the show for a really long time because it is one of my favorite comedies. And Bernie, when I reached out to you to start talking about coming on the show, we got on like a Zoom call, went back and forth for a little bit, and the topic of Airplane came up. What made you want to talk about this movie, and what is your relationship with it?
It is one of my favorite movies. I love comedies. To me, when I watch a movie, I don't want to be sad or necessarily think deeply. I like to laugh and forget about whatever troubles are going on during that day. So that was part of it. I love the comedy of the movie. And when I first saw it, the movie came out in 1980. I don't believe I saw it in a theater, although I may have. But the first dialogue in the movie was something that years later I actually got to live. So that was kind of cool too.
Brian, AJ, did you guys have experience with this movie before we watched it for the show?
Yes. There's no version of my life that I can remember before having seen this movie. It got play on TV my entire life. Like, it was just always on TV. So I had certainly seen it in bits and chunks before seeing it all the way through. I don't know if I've ever watched the actual theatrical cut of the film before. And what's really weird is that the TV version not only cuts things and even has a couple of alternate takes of the same shot, like the topless shot where she's clothed or whatever. There are scenes in the TV distribution that are not in the theatrical film. So there are jokes that I remember, and there are also like jokes I remember from Airplane 2 that it's like, oh yeah, you just kind of get them mixed up. But like, for instance, the two kids who talk to each other, and they both talk like, 30-year-old professional adults or whatever. They had like 3 scenes in the TV version of the movie, and all of their dialogue is just straight up lifted from a movie called Crash Landing in 1958. And in the theatrical cut, it's just the one scene of them where they have their coffee.
Wait, in Crash Landing, does she say that she likes her coffee like she likes her men black?
No, they embellished that one.
I need to just clear that for myself.
Yeah, slight embellishments here and there, but mostly the same.
Yeah, no, I had not seen this movie all the way through until yesterday. I had seen bits and pieces. It had always been on the background in parties and things, so I remembered certain parts of it. I remembered the bit of I just want to tell you all good luck. We're all counting on you, which was, I thought, for a long time, the funniest thing I'd ever seen. And then I was proven wrong, because there was a joke in here that made me laugh so hard I actually had to pause the movie and take a breather. This film is so fascinating to me because it's so different than any comedy that's currently being made. Like, no one is really going for this kind of slapstick. It's relentless in its jokes.
It should be said, people weren't really making movies like this then until this movie came out and inspired a lot of copycats. The only thing like more recently that I can think of that has this sort of tone was like Angie Tribeca, which I don't think a lot of people watched.
This is a movie that my mom quotes all the time.
Okay.
I rewatched it this morning just because it's been a few years since I've last seen it. So each time you watch it, you pick up something new. That's one of the things I like about it. It's not like, oh, okay, I've already seen this. There's something new I didn't think of before.
How did this movie even come to exist here? I normally don't do the deep dives. This is usually Brian's domain.
Yeah.
But I just really needed to do this. And so in my research, I decided that we need a brand new segment.
And now a 24th Stanley Cup banner will hang from the rafters of the famous Forum in Montreal. The Canadiens win the Stanley Cup.
The Worst of All Possible Worlds presents Profiles in Canadian Excellence.
What the fuck are you going on about?
So this all starts with a man known as Arthur Haley. Arthur Haley was born in Luton, in England, in the year 1920, and ended up serving in World War II in the Royal Air Force. He was such a hardcore Tory, though, that when Labour came in the post-war, he was like, I'm out of here, and he moved to Canada.
You won't socialize my health care.
That's
right.
Wait. And so the most Tory man alive started writing gigs for hire. And something that I thought was so funny about this is that in some ways, his trajectory was like the Bizarro World version of yours, Bernie, where like you ended up going down the radio track, whereas he ended up going down the print track. He did a bunch of writing gigs for hire. At one point, he ended up the editor of something called Bus and Truck Transport.
Oh, wow.
It's like an industry journal in Canada.
Was it just for like non-equity tours?
So the first script that he sold, like his first original script that this guy, Arthur Haley, sold, was for a teleplay called Flight into Danger. And it was picked up by the CBC.
Wow. Okay,
And
so that was
the CBC,
his very first
script that he sold. And the CBC broadcast this teleplay in 1956. And basically the gist of this movie is that there is a passenger jet. It's in the air. It's flying west to Vancouver. And the pilots get food poisoning from bad fish. A World War II flying ace, see, he was in the Royal Air Force, has to land the plane.
So it's really just like, if I had been there, it would have been different.
No,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Now, the funny thing about this, too, is that the pilot in this original teleplay, Flight into Danger, was played by none other than James Doohan, a.k.a. Scotty from Star Trek. Also worth noting that James Doohan also served in the Canadian Infantry and Air Force. He was on Juno Beach during, like, at the D-Day landing. He was rolling up with one of those, like, fucking Saving Private Ryan ass things. So
yeah, and he got wasted by friendly fire. He got shot multiple times, which is why he lost his finger. But he also got shot, I think, in the head or like in the torso, in the leg, because it was the middle of the night and he was moving from one spot to another, and another Canadian soldier just started firing because he saw that shadow on the horizon.
You really need to stop sneaking up on people.
So obviously a real profile in Canadian excellence here.
Yeah.
And the excellence continues for Arthur Haley, right? because in 1950...
That's a word for it.
In 1957, Paramount, the Hollywood studio, picks up the teleplay from the CBC and adapts it into a Hollywood film entitled 0 Hour. This is released to, I would say, mild commercial success.
Yeah, I mean, this was a B movie. This was a movie that I think the miniature work is very charming. I don't mean that condescendingly either. It's like really fun to watch. But boy, it's rough. But the dialogue is so ridiculous.
It's funny.
There's a character who's just Senor Wenthes at some point, just pulls out this weird little hand puppet that he has. I couldn't believe that somehow didn't end up an airplane.
It's so ridiculous. This
More hand puppets in movies.
But the main effect of this movie is that it really raises Arthur Haley's profile, right? Mm-hmm. There's a novelization of the film. It also ends up being a modest commercial success. And now Haley is a bankable writer. In 1968, this is 11 years after the release of 0 Hour, Doubleday publishes Airport. Airport is a novel, also written by Arthur Haley, where an airport general manager tries to keep an airport open during a snowstorm when a hijacker detonates a suicide bomb, and that airplane then has to land at this airport in the middle of a snowstorm. Right?
Also, everyone is cheating on their wife right at this exact moment.
Yes.
They have to cheat on their wife, otherwise they can't land the plane. This movie was released to near universal critical revulsion.
Yes.
And it was
Wow.
one of the biggest hits of the late 60s
Well,
as
that's
far
what's
as
crazy,
novels are
right?
concerned. Like
The book was on the New York Times bestseller list for over a year.
in #1 for 30 weeks.
I can explain this, though.
Oh, yeah?
They sold it in airport stores, and everyone was like, airport? That's where I am, and bought it immediately.
And so Universal, seeing the success of this book, they option it. They make it into a film of the same name. It's released in 1970. This movie is dog shit. I don't know.
0 Hour is like fun and bad,
Yeah.
but like this movie is so goddamn boring.
Bernie, have you seen Airport?
I saw it years and years ago.
Okay.
And
And what an impression it made.
and weren't there, wasn't that about the time the Poseidon Adventure
Yes.
also came out?
Yes.
Yeah. So this movie, it's shot on Todd AO, so it looks really gorgeous, right? The equivalent of IMAX at the time. It was costumed by Edith Head. They had all these big stars: Gene Seberg, Dean Martin, others.
Fucking Helen Hayes.
Helen Hayes won an Oscar for it. The movie
She has a theater.
this movie was also released to universal critical revulsion.
Yes.
I mean, no one writing reviews of anything, no one who liked movies liked this movie, but it was a massive hit.
Yeah, it was the second highest grossing film of 1970 in the United States.
Edged out by Love Story.
It pulled down $128 million against a $10 million budget.
It makes me so mad. It makes me so mad that this thing even exists.
But the big effect of Airport is that now all of a sudden disaster movies are the new trend. And I know, Bernie, you were talking before we recorded a little bit about how, you sort of remember these trends, right? Were you just taking in a bunch of disaster movies in the 70s?
Well, I remember seeing that. I remember the Poseidon Adventure in particular. Instead of airplanes, now we have boats that
Right,
we're
exactly.
having disasters on. And I'm sure there were others that aren't coming to mind immediately. But
Oh, I've got a list here. You want to hear them? So in 1974 alone, you get Earthquake and The Towering Inferno.
Oh, yep. I remember that.
The later 70s, you get Roller Coaster.
What is roller coaster? Hold on. I have to ask. What is it? Just
AJ, what does
a
it sound
roller
like?
coaster?
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
But how long could that movie be? It's just they're trapped. They put a ladder up. They're
Well,
saved.
that's the great thing is that Airport showed you could do nothing for the
Right.
first hour and
Right.
40 minutes. And then
Literally.
finally let the plane take off, and the bomb doesn't even go off until 15 minutes before credit rolls.
Are you telling me that the first hour of roller coaster is just people cheating on their wives in a roller
It
coaster?
could very well be. Who knows? No one's seen it. There's also Meteor, Avalanche, Flood, Hurricane.
No, those aren't movie
These are all
titles.
movies, all from the 70s. There are at least 5 different movies about killer bee swarms. There's the Poseidon Adventure. There is a sequel to the Poseidon Adventure. So it turns out there was a Morning After. That's for all the Poseidon Adventure heads out there. There's
Thanks, Brian.
Then there was like an attempt at doing a prestige disaster movie about the Hindenburg called The Hindenburg. There are 3 more airport movies. The second movie is called Airport 1975, and it was released in 1974 for some reason.
The future is now, Brian.
The last one is about the Concorde. It's just called The Concorde, Airport 1979. And weirdly, the one real Concorde that they used for filming for exteriors is the Concorde that ended up crashing in 2000, bringing down that whole fleet.
No way.
Wow.
Yeah. Also, the plane that they used in exteriors for this for Airport 1 also crashed a few years later.
You want to talk about like disaster movies? There's really one disaster movie that sort of looms large over the entirety of the 70s, and that, of course, is
Much like Leon,
getting larger. And that is, of course, Jaws.
Jaws goes beyond the disaster movie, right? Like, critics actually are a little bit warmer to it. The crowds love it even more than they did anything else. And we've never seen sales like this before. This heralds the new kind of model, the blockbuster, leading to Star Wars, leading to Marvel, leading to everything that we understand movies to be today in the 21st century.
Thanks, Steve.
Like, because you were, squarely in the demographic that these movies were being pitched toward in the 70s, what are sort of your memories of these movies, how people were talking about them, and just sort of what the pop culture landscape looked like?
Well, I think one of the things that comes to mind is, and again, I think of the Poseidon Adventure first and foremost, it was sort of a disaster love boat. All these stars who weren't necessarily doing a lot of work elsewhere at the time are in this film. And, you're kind of rooting for Ernest Borgnine because you think of him as McHale's Navy or something.
Yeah.
Right.
So
or for our younger listeners, Mermaid Man from SpongeBob SquarePants.
Yeah.
I think I saw it as cheesy even at the time.
Yeah.
Red Buttons, another actor who was probably past his prime at the time he was doing this film. That's what I think of when I think of some of these disaster films.
I feel like that's sort of the big thing that adventure movies become a template for in many ways. Adventure/disaster movies, right? Where we can take these guys, recontextualize them in a new way, and now their career gets another 10 years.
Yeah.
Because all they have to do is stand up there, say lines, and not be dead.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's usually not sort of a regular star. It's either, someone past their prime or someone really young who's still kind of on the upswing, like O.J. Simpson in The Towering Inferno.
And later the Naked Gun film.
Yeah.
And later, who knows? No one's heard of him for a while. So
Yeah, I'm looking at my phone now. It looks like he just went on to live a very normal life.
Yes.
No complications. I love Poseidon Adventure because I love watching a ship sink. I love a good disaster movie where a boat meets its untimely end.
It gets what it deserves, goddammit.
It deserves.
But we are ultimately not here to talk about Airport, and thank God for that. We are here to talk about Airplane. And at this point, I would
With
like
the
to...
exclamation point. Don't forget the exclamation point.
Yeah, Josh, can we hear that? Can we hear the exclamation point?
Absolutely. Airplane!
There it is.
So enter now David and Jerry Zucker and Jim Abrahams. David and Jerry went to high school with Jim in Shorewood, which is a inner ring suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And after graduating from high school, the three also went to UW-Madison together. So these are hardcore Wisconsin boys, sort of not, I wouldn't say my natural nemesis. Like if they were from Ohio, they would be my natural nemesis. They're more my natural foils.
Wisconsin is a parallel Michigan.
Correct.
Right? They're not enemies, but they exist on different planes. And you actually, if you're in Michigan, you can't go to Wisconsin. That's right. And other way around. It creates a massive paradox.
Yeah, it's not good.
Boss Shorman will try and beat the shit out of you, Josh, if you ever go to Wisconsin.
While they were at UW-Madison together, David, Jerry, and Jim formed a comedy troupe that they called the Kentucky Fried Theater. And I have here a quote from Rich Markey, who also ended up working in the entertainment industry. He wrote an article in the UW Alumni magazine from spring 2007, and I'm just going to quote from that. Their initial inclination was to create stage sketches that mirrored the social and political targets then in vogue, such as military service, President Nixon, recreational drug use, and the generational divide. We avoided politics. We just wanted to make people laugh. Chudnow says, Jerry Zucker also avoided political confrontations. One day, a block party right in front of his rented house on Mifflin Street turned into a showdown with police. His roommate, Andy Strauss, 72, went outside and got tangled up in the ensuing violence. The conflagration was broadcast live on network TV, and Andy's parents saw the broadcast and realized where it was occurring. Worried, they called and asked to speak to their son. Jerry told them, Andy can't come to the phone right now. He's outside rioting. I like this quote, and I like this sort of as a summation of sort of what Kentucky Fried Theater was doing at the time. They were reflecting what was going on sociopolitically at the time, but they were not political. Mm-hmm. And I am curious, Bernie, because you were, a teenager during the heights of the Vietnam War protests. I'm curious to hear sort of like what you remember about this time and what it looked like for you.
One of my classmates, I was in 6th grade at the time, his older brother was killed in Vietnam. So that probably is the most vivid memory for me of that. But, what I remember was just watching this and thinking of, the silent majority and the iron workers in New York were very conservative and they would beat up the hippies that were protesting and that sort of thing. And another thing that was very vivid, it's still on TV now, the 10 o'clock news on Channel 5 in New York. Every Friday, they would do an honor roll of all the people from the New York metro area that had died in the past week. And that was just very vivid you see all these names. It was not just 2 or 3 names. This went on for, I think at least a minute, maybe longer, of all these people who had died. Wow. So those were the things that really stood out in my memory. Certainly big events like Kent State. It was before I was in college, but I was looking toward college and thinking about, what would this mean for me? I fortunately turned 17 when the draft had ended, but I didn't know that it would end when I was, an early teenager and thinking, what am I going to do when I become draft age?
And I think there's something interesting, too, about the way that then this sort of stuff, you can either call it out directly and satirize it, or you can sort of create comedy in a parallel lane that, doesn't confront it so directly.
To me, Laugh-In, I remember watching that, and that was revolutionary to the kind of comedy that they were doing, because I grew up on things like Ed Sullivan and, the stand-up comics that they would have on those kinds of shows. And so that was what I was used to. And when I saw Laugh-In, that was, this is, and the sitcoms of the 60s, the CBS rural comedies and all those things. That was what I thought comedy was, and you'd hear about Blue albums that I wasn't allowed to listen to,
Red Fox,
that would be out there, but that wasn't on my radar. It was more the absurdist type things.
Well, and just bringing it back to Airplane, or how we get to Airplane, Kentucky Fried Theater, they're able to find their wheelhouse with this really absurd stuff pretty quickly, right? And they start developing sort of a reputation as being a cult favorite in Wisconsin. And after Jerry Zucker graduates from college, all 3 of them move west and start making connections in Hollywood. In Hollywood, they meet a director known as John Landis. Heard of him?
Don't let that man near a helicopter.
And he, of course, would later go on to direct movies including Blues Brothers, Animal House, Coming to America. Zucker Abrams Zucker and John Landis put together a whole bunch of sketches that they mostly wrote and performed during their time at the University of Wisconsin. And this was something called Kentucky Fried Movie, which was released in 1977. It ended up grossing $7.1 million against a $650,000 budget. And now they are officially indie comedy up-and-comers. It's hit or miss, as is often the nature of sketch. Some things really haven't aged well, but there are a few banger fucking jokes, some unbelievably funny writing. And the best jokes are the ones that are in the wheelhouse that come to be associated with Zucker Abrams Zucker, which is to say, really clever writing that involves a lot of wordplay coupled with dense visual gags. So fast forward to 1979. Disaster movies, as we previously talked about, have now reached a total saturation point.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways, things are primed for a movie that sends up disaster movies, much like how Mel Brooks made Blazing Saddles and basically killed the Western. At this point, Airport has already had 3 sequels. Airport 1975, released in 1974.
Because it's about the future. Don't you want to know about the future of a few months from now?
Airport 77, released in 1977.
There we go.
And of course, Airport 80 the Concorde, released in 1979. God damn it. So David and Jerry Zucker have an idea, right? And this is just quoting straight from a Guardian article about it. That was an interview with them. We used to seek out movies that were mind-numbingly serious and dub them with our own voices. Late one night, we caught 0 Hour, a 1957 film about a former World War II pilot landing a stricken passenger flight, and thought, why don't we recreate the whole movie instead?
Yeah.
And good news, the president of Paramount, a young man known as Michael Eisner, is interested.
Well, and that's the thing is, like, most people at the time, and certainly like my parents, the way they understood this movie was like, yeah, it's a parody of Airport. But no, it's actually a remake of 0 Hour.
Right.
They got the rights for it and everything.
Paramount already had the rights. That's the thing. It was the same studio.
There's a writing credit that goes to the screenwriter for 0 Hour, right? It's like, it's all because beyond just making fun of it, they straight up just do entire scenes of dialogue exactly as written or almost exactly as written in 1957. Yep.
And it should be mentioned that all of the actors who are receiving the script for this, like, a lot of big names are turning this thing down, right? They offer this to Charlton Heston, and I can only imagine what him reading this script would have been like.
I like to think that that's why he was like, he got the script for Wayne's World 2, and he's like, oh, I can't do this again. I can't let this opportunity pass.
You know, the people that they did end up with actually battled with the script even while they were filming it, because they kept trying to, like, find character motivations, and the director just kept having to tell them, just say the lines. I promise you this will work, but you can't think about it too hard.
And so it is greenlit by Paramount with a $3.5 million budget and is released to immediate commercial and critical success in the summer of 1980.
The red zone is for immediate loading and unloading of passengers only. There's no stopping in the white zone.
No, the white zone is for loading and unloading, and there is no stopping in the red zone.
The red zone has always been for loading and unloading. There's never stopping in a white zone.
Don't tell me which zone is for stopping and which zone is for loading.
Listen, Betty, don't start up with your white zone shit again.
And the thing is, you could watch this scene and not even really catch the dialogue until it's been going on for a while, because it's very complex. You have all of these big moving camera setups that are introducing you to all of the very colorful characters that you'll be hanging out with for the rest of the film. And of course, all of this great Elmer Bernstein music playing throughout. And I think he also deserves a lot of credit for writing comedic music and writing music that has a setup and eventually a punchline at the climax of the film.
But Brian, you put a note in here. These announcements are done by a real husband and wife?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they were trying to find the right people. They auditioned a bunch of folks to do the voiceover, and they're like, this just doesn't sound right. So I think it was the LAX announcements. It was this guy, Doc Taylor, and his wife. I couldn't find his name, but I couldn't find his wife's name. I could find Doc Taylor's name because there was a little article about him in the LA Times, and he owns a company. He owned a company that produced announcements. So it would be stuff like being in the Phoenix airport and saying, you know, the smoking area is over here, or stuff for like taxi services saying, you know, make sure you get all your luggage on the way out. And I think it's interesting because he's not someone who worked in movies. His wife also did these announcements, also didn't work in movies. And they got to do these lines back and forth as husband and wife. You know, we've talked about radio drama and we talk about movies and actors, and we are actors, AJ and I especially, and we've done some voiceover stuff too. But this is a really different side of the industry, and it's one that you're in, Bernie. How does this industry work? How do people find the people to do the voices for announcements
At
for
an
the
airport.
trains. Yeah, for the trains, for the airports,
because you've done both,
taxis.
right?
Yeah.
I think there's a few different ways. There's a company, there are probably more than one company, but there's one well-known company, and I don't even know the name of the company. I think they're based in St. Louis.
Okay.
That provides voices for places like airports. In fact, you can hear her voice in the New York City subway. Her name is Carolyn Hopkins. She does what I do for the lettered subway lines.
Right.
And she's up in Maine. But she's also like at Charles de Gaulle Airport. Many of the airports, you'll hear her voice. So that company markets that service. And she was hired by that company. And I think they have a male announcer that's sort of her equivalent for the company if somebody wants a male voice instead of a female voice. So that's one way. The other way is basically they know of somebody and they ask. That was the story with me.
Right.
I know the guy up in Boston who had done a lot of the announcements up there. He was just an employee of the MBTA, and when they needed a voice, he had a good speaking voice, so they hired him. So it can be a little bit of both. And there are people who also are voiceover actors who audition for these things that you'll hear on different systems.
Now, I did just want to point up as well, Bernie, when we were talking a bit about what thing we should do, one of the things that you mentioned is that you did basically this, the loading and unloading like voiceover stuff at Newark Liberty Airport, right?
Yes, okay. I do the announcement. As far as I know, it still runs.
Wow.
That tells you basically, move your car, you'll be towed.
Right.
Yeah.
But I never have a dialogue with myself about it.
Right.
I wish that's how it worked.
That'd be cool.
I would love to hear the announcers argue with each other.
I'm assuming this is a flat rate thing. You don't get usage or royalties or anything.
No, I got paid for when I did it, and that was it.
Can you imagine the royalties you would get if every single time?
Oh, yeah. Even if it was just a penny that I got paid for every time my voice was used in the subway, I would be rich.
I mean, here's a question that I have for you. And just want to be very clear, by the way, if this isn't something that you want to talk about, that's totally okay.
Oh, no, I don't mind talking about it. I don't mind.
The voice that plays on the subways is still, I guess you could say, like your masculine or male presenting voice, right?
Yeah, I call it my guy voice.
Your guy
voice.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you still do work with that guy voice? Are you now like, I don't want to do that anymore? Like, where do you find yourself and what does that look like in terms of your day-to-day work?
Maybe the best way to answer that is by doing this. The next downtown number 2 will arrive in 2 minutes. Please stand away from the platform edge. So
Unreal.
As you can hear, I don't mind that voice. If they need new announcements, and the most recent one was in December, I recorded new announcements for the subway.
Okay.
I go back to that voice. And I'm a voice actor, so that is a voice that I'm acting in. So I don't have a problem with it.
Bernie, it literally, I mean, just to give like sort of the listeners the experience of watching that, it was like you were possessed by an entirely different person and that voice just came out of you. It's unreal.
But that's acting, right?
That's fucking acting.
Just the tone of it too. It was like you were dubbed. It was like it came from a totally different place. And AJ and I are AJ's a talented actor, and
Brian is also a very talented actor and
but like
actor.
that level of skill and control always just blows me away.
If let's say a voice actor wanted one of these jobs, they just have to ask somebody for. Do you have a name or perhaps a phone number that we could call? The Patreon pays the bills, but I'm in deep.
AJ, the MTA does not want someone going off on tangents about horses. Let me fill that 5-minute wait that you have.
Have you looked at the Central Park horse carriage rides? Maybe.
Maybe.
Well, let's get back into the movie here.
Sure.
Now with sort of everything framed up, like you said, Brian, there are shots of all of the parts of the airport.
Yeah.
We're seeing the way that the
and
airport
they're very
works.
complex. They're very, very well built shots. None of this is lazy, and I think a lot of times when comedy movies get produced, they're under budget, or sometimes there's a charm to being slapdash, we say as podcasters. But like this movie really takes its jokes seriously. There's a massively expensive gag they do where the guy who's holding the big glowing rods on the runway points to direct his coworker in another direction and causes a plane to crash into the airport. And they have this huge model of the front of a plane.
That is a full-size practical effect.
Crashing in through all of these windows. It's all over-cranked and in slow motion, and this huge crowd of stuntmen running away from it. It's fantastic.
You know, as they're walking through the airport, something that I don't see anymore, but I remember it happening, all the solicitations that you would get for the Moonies or whatever.
Yeah. I will say this. If you fly into San Francisco airport, those guys are still there.
Really?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I had a shocking, like an actual culture shock moment when I flew into, I think, San Jose. And there was like a sign that was like, we protect the free speech rights of all people who want to speak with you in this era. Some fucking, Christians walked up. The whole thing.
Wow.
They still do it. Yeah.
And there's a great reversal in this movie where two of the characters who end up on the plane in the film are Hare Krishnas. And they're walking by some Church of Universal, whatever, and they're like,
well, we gave it The Office, which is such a hyper-specific phrase for that time period, right? Like, the only other time I've ever heard that was in a Family Guy episode, and they put it in Stewie's mouth to make it sound like purposefully old-fashioned, but it's just not a phrase that's used to hitting my ear, and I think it's a really lovely one. I want to bring back I gave it The Office.
Well, we don't have offices anymore. That's the problem. Nobody wants to work anymore.
No one wants to solicit their cult at the airport anymore.
Nobody wants to flip a Scientologist onto their back.
That's right. But you know who does? Ted, our hero.
He sure does.
Ted Stryker.
I hardly know her.
He's our main protagonist here, and he enters the airport because he is trying to track down Elaine. Elaine is his girlfriend. She's a flight attendant, and she's on the next plane out, right? And he wants to get to her in time to talk with her because, well, their relationship is on the rocks.
Elaine.
Ted.
I came home early and found your note. I guess you meant for me to read it later. Elaine, I've got to talk to you.
I just don't want to go over it anymore.
I know things haven't been right for a long time, but it'll be different. Like it was in the beginning. If you'll just be patient, I can work things out.
I have been patient and I've tried to help, but you wouldn't even let me do that.
Don't you feel anything for me at all anymore?
It takes so many things to make love last. Most of all, it takes respect. And I can't live with the man I don't respect.
This is Robert Hayes playing Ted Stryker and Julie Haggerty playing Elaine Dickinson.
A big part of the magic of this movie is that, no one's really letting on that they're telling a joke. They're not making a goofy face. They're playing it straight. There are all of these very serious, deep voice actors. And here, they don't even have any jokes written, right? It's like when you go to a midnight screening of The Room and then you're supposed to sit in silence at the flower shop. You're just supposed to let that whole scene happen. They're really just letting the cheesiness be the joke here. And so these are sort of these longer jokes, and you have the beginning of this Elmer Bernstein motif that will eventually pay off at the climax with that really sour note that they get to hit.
Julie Haggerty's voice, that's her real voice, apparently, because I looked at other clips to see if that was just put on for this film or that's how she actually talked. And apparently that's how she actually spoke.
Her energy is so weird, isn't it? Like in a good way.
Like you say, they played that straight, although, again, her voice does add a little bit of comedic effect, I think, even though she's doing straight lines. You don't stay in those serious moments all that long. Then there are other things that they'll go back to that are still funny. So you kind of go back and forth. You don't have long, serious stretches.
I promise that in this episode, we are not going to deconstruct the comedy to death, except for right now. Because
strap in.
I just wanted to, this is the one piece that I really outlined exhaustively because this scene is so precise.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk about all of its moving pieces. So the next character that we meet after Ted and Elaine is Clarence Over. He is going to be the pilot, and the scene that introduces him here is just, I think, so mechanically impressive. So to get started with, the captain is at the newsstand, and he's browsing the magazines. This scene begins with him browsing the fiction and nonfiction magazine sections, and then we get our first visual gag, which is that there has been a guy sort of standing on the right side of the frame. he steps out of the frame to reveal a third, much larger magazine section called whacking material.
It's all porno mags. I should have paused and looked at all the titles. One of them was called Boxed Lunch.
So Over subsequently moves over to the whacking material. He picks up and peruses a magazine entitled Modern Sperm. And then he gets paged over the PA to pick up the white courtesy phone. We've gotten the white and red bit set up from the very beginning of the movie. That's the first joke, right?
Right.
And he goes over to the courtesy phone, picks up the red phone, and the voice on the other end says, "No, the other phone."
Also, like lines of action, we're taking a slight angle at the wall on the magazines. We're not going head on like a Wes Anderson shot or like The Graduate.
Right.
And the action moves right first to go to the porno mags, and then the dolly goes left over to the phones. So we're kind of washing this way and then washing back that way. You get to see some of the other categories for magazines. Stuff like Golf Magazine is labeled under fiction.
I like the implication that golf does not exist in the airplane universe.
Yes. So Over then, of course, picks up the correct phone, the white phone. And at this point, he is put on the line with a doctor from the Mayo Clinic. And you can tell because behind the doctor is a wall of jars of mayonnaise.
Yes.
Huge mayo.
Exactly
and
the joke that you're going to expect them to do.
Right.
And they're talking about this heart transplant. This is a plot beat in Airport 74.
Okay.
With Linda Blair as this sick child who has to be, lifted off and taken wherever
Blair?
it is. Yeah.
Poor Linda Blair.
Poor woman.
Oh, man.
And so they're talking about, we have this heart that's available for transplant, but the heart is live and sitting on the Mayo Clinic guy's desk and just pulsing and bouncing around.
There are strings on it. You can see the strings that are making this heart bounce around.
You can imagine the person off camera bouncing it around going, really having a great time.
And so all of this then has come together. We have been effectively introduced to this character. We have been introduced to the stakes of a subplot. And just to polish it all off, we get this final kicker.
This is the operator, Captain Over. I have an emergency call for you on line 5 from a Mr. Ham.
All right, give me Ham on 5. Hold the mail.
So let's establish here. We've had sight gags. We've had reversal of expectations sort of comedy. And we have one of the silliest pun punchlines in the history of cinema, all within a minute and a half. And that's sort of how compact this movie is, like how tightly written it is, that they just throw every joke they can at the wall and somehow they all harmonize with each other.
Well, I think one of the things that maybe you guys overlook because you're younger is Peter Graves, the actor who's playing Captain Over, was pretty much known to people who were seeing this movie originally as the guy from Mission Impossible, the TV show. And he was a very serious actor on that. And seeing him in this context, just that alone is funny. So forget about any punchlines or visual jokes. Just seeing him play a comedy role is humorous in and of itself. So that is one of the things. But like you say, there is so much to see. I was doing a lot of pausing today when I was watching it just to, I missed this. And the version I saw apparently was severely edited from the original movie because there was a lot of stuff that you've mentioned already that I did not even see in the version that I watched today.
I think there's 3 cuts of this movie. And so, there are just whole gags that disappear depending on what version you may have watched in the past or may watch today. Yeah.
Most comedy movies, when they introduce a character, like the idea is that you like introduce their thing from the word go, and then that's sort of their thing for the rest of the movie, right? Their comic utility.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting about Captain Over is that you think you know what his deal is, and then later they reveal a very different side of him. And coming off of Mission Impossible 2, what a brave choice to take this role.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would be brave enough to play. We'll
talk about that a little bit later. But no, for sure. It's Strong choices, big swings.
Yeah.
And another big swing that the movie takes is in sort of the next big set piece scene where after everybody gets on the plane, including Ted, he's able to get a smoking ticket and get on board. He has this flashback scene where he is remembering his time being stationed at a post on the Barbary Coast, which apparently is populated by nothing but pirates and Italians.
And Girl Scouts.
Yes, and Girl Scouts, of course. We also get a line here that Zucker used this line in Kentucky Fried Movie. They'll use it again later, describing the place as worse than Detroit. Sort of funny. The line should have been worse than Cleveland, but whatever, I'll let it slide.
He can't actually declare war in Wisconsin because that would actually break the space-time continuum.
Correct.
Yeah. This turns into a Saturday Night Fever parody that goes on for like 7 or 8 minutes.
Yeah, it's a long scene. And Stryker's flashbacks go on too long by design. Because it is part of that feeling of watching an old B movie and you're like having fun, but it is also just too long. And this, of course, sets us up for the punchline where every time he comes back to the present, whoever he's been talking to has killed themselves or is about to kill themselves.
This is the moment when the camera panned back from this first story and the old woman that he had been talking to, you just see her legs dangling next to him. I had to pause and take a lap around the apartment. I don't think I've laughed that hard at a movie in like 10 years. How ballsy a joke. And because it was also the feeling in the audience that you get watching that Saturday Night Fever thing. We're like, oh, this is going on too long. They're having some real pacing problems. And then it cuts back and it's just like, don't worry. The characters in the movie also think it has pacing problems.
Well, it's interesting too, because like there's a very tight set of things that characters can react to. Like almost never can they react to what someone says as like ridiculous. And so when they do, it's for a very specific sort of moment, right? But usually the humor just comes from treating that really ridiculous thing that person said as though it's just part of the regular dialogue and continuing to go on.
And very impressive fight choreography from those scouts, I'll tell you.
Incredible stunt work,
it's really, and it's a sequence that goes on very long, but
again,
it's very
talking
impressive.
about like setups and very complicated things, all this breakaway scenery, all this moving, like a big part of the Saturday Night Fever sequence is just this long fight sequence, and it's not happening in the background. It is the main attraction for like a minute and a half.
And it's also, I think, setting up, I mean, not to get too like fucking metatextual or whatever.
Here we go.
But I do think that it is setting up also a sense of Ted as an unreliable narrator. Like the fact that everybody...
Sorry. Because, you imagine him describing in vivid detail these two Girl Scouts fighting as the woman is making the noose next to him.
Like that's a funny extra level to it, I think, right? Like him sitting here being like, yes, and also I went out and I began disco dancing, and there was a guy who got stabbed. I don't know, like it worked on so many levels for me, and I think that's the best jokes sort of work in that way. Another piece here is that we get a flashback on Elaine's side, kind of like, summer nights from Greece. They're kissing on the beach.
Well, it's From Here to Eternity, Josh.
Right, well, yeah.
This is a movie reference, so it's okay if you don't know it, but they're just straight up doing From Here to Eternity, except sticking them further out into the ocean so that they get just destroyed by these waves. This looks like it must have been miserable to shoot.
It's so funny too. I mean, you just want to talk about like the little bits that make it funny, right?
Yeah.
They are, making out on the beach, but they are very low down on the beach, so the tide comes in and just completely covers them.
It moves their bodies.
Oh my God.
They get pushed up the beach.
You can see the actors tense up when the water hits them. They're kissing, they make out in the water. They're going, no, don't take me out to sea.
They get covered in real kelp. Some of the bits that I clipped are the ones that work pretty well in audio format. In this bit, there is a little boy named Joey. This is pulled more or less directly from the original 0 Hour. Yes. Joey is sort of a precocious little boy. He gets pulled up into the airplane cabin because back in the day, kids could do that. They could just go into the cabin.
Yeah, even in our lifetime.
I remember doing this.
I was going to say, I did that my first airplane flight.
Did you get a pair of wings and everything? Like the whole deal?
I didn't get a plane, but I did get a wing.
Like the entire model plane that they have in this cockpit, which is also from 0 Hour.
Yes, it is.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, that's just one of those things that changed after 9/11. Sorry, anyone born after the year 2001.
Which is almost everybody who listens to this show.
That's true.
But like I said, this is almost entirely dialogue and setup from the script of 0 Hour, but at one point it changes. So, like, see if you can figure out what point that is.
We have a visitor.
Hello.
Hi.
This is Captain Over, Mr. Murdoch, and Mr. Basta. This is Joey Hammond.
Oh, hi, Joey. Come on up here, you can see better.
Joey, we have something here for our special visitors. Would you like to have it?
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Sure. You ever been in a cockpit before?
No, sir, I've never been up in a plane before.
You ever seen a grown man naked?
Bernie, you have to understand something. Brian and Josh have been relentlessly quoting that at me for almost 100 episodes. I have never had any idea what the fuck they were talking about until I watched this movie and I was like, oh, they've been quoting Airplane at me.
Well, it sounds like someone here hasn't been to a Turkish prison.
That's right. So this again is Peter Graves. We mentioned him earlier. Same one who does that earlier scene with the whacking material. This is such a dark choice. It is so funny.
One of the most sophisticated pedophile jokes, I think, in cinema history, and one of the most beloved.
Yes.
And this is playing off of the way that the actor playing the co-pilot in 0 Hour is behaving, because he is giving off a horrible vibe.
Yes.
That is not being given off in the performance in this movie at all.
No. Which is also very funny, right?
Yeah.
Like, Peter Graves was so uncomfortable with this. Like, he went along with it for the sake of the joke.
Why would he be uncomfortable?
Who can say? But you can even see him, like, cringing a little bit before he says the line. So there's this funny tension going on between, like, the performer, the performance, and what is being said.
Well, again, I didn't know that Peter Graves was a fairly conservative Christian and had refused to be, at one point, was not going to be in the film until he got some reassurances. So that plays into his uncomfortableness about saying some of this and how he plays that off. And the actor that plays Joey, he's got that fresh, scrubbed face look that kid actors had back in the 1960s, like Leave It to Beaver and stuff like that.
Yeah, curly hair and freckles.
Just makes it even more pure, you know?
Very Ron Howard.
It's such a delicate balancing act, too, that the delivery of that line, right?
Yeah.
It has to be exactly the same as every other question that came before. But it's just like the question is over before you've had time to process it, which is exactly what it is. So then the surprise catches up with you in real time. Like, it's a masterful performance by the most uncomfortable actor I've ever seen on screen.
He's way less handsy with the kid than in 0 Hour.
Oh, it's so bad in 0 Hour, dude. I also watched it just because I'd never seen it before, so I watched it for this podcast.
No one has seen it before, Josh.
No, I know. So I guess other piece here, right, is another, I guess, uncomfortable actor. But here I think the discomfort is part of the bit, right?
Right.
That the co-pilot is a man named Roger Murdoch. Or is it?
Flight 209er to Denver Radio. Climbing to cruise at 42,000. We'll report again over Lincoln. Over and out.
Wait a minute. I know you. You're Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You play basketball for the Los Angeles Lakers.
I'm sorry, son, but you must have me confused with someone else. My name is Roger Murdoch. I'm the co-pilot.
You are Kareem. I've seen you play. My dad's got season tickets.
I think you should go back to your seat now, Joey. Right, Clarence?
Oh, he's not bothering anyone. Let him stay here.
All right, but just remember, my name is Roger Murdoch. I'm an airline pilot.
I think you're the greatest, but my dad says you don't work hard enough on defense. And he says that lots of times you don't even run down court. And that you don't really try, except during the playoffs.
Well, I don't. Listen,
he grabs this kid's
I've been
shirt.
hearing that crap ever since I was at UCLA. I'm out there busting my buns every night. Tell your old man to drag Walton and Lanier up and down the court for 48 minutes.
Joey, you like movies about gladiators?
This is wild because first of all, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is a child in this. Like he's
so
really
young.
And I actually think he gives a great performance in this movie. For as long as he's in it.
It's like this is the one scene. I mean, there's another scene before this where they're all checking in and getting everything set up and saying Roger and
Roger,
under and
vector?
yeah. He's great here. I was watching this and I thought, wow, Hollywood Reporter columnist Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was in this movie.
What a renaissance man.
Really
right?
is.
Truly.
He's a fantastic writer. It's playing off of OJ, which is really funny because then ZAZ work with OJ for the Naked Gun movies.
What really made it for me was where Joey talks about, oh, but my dad thinks you don't run hard enough on defense.
Right.
That's really what made it, not just recognizing him as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And of course, the other part that, again, might be lost on some people, he's got the name Roger Murdoch, but before he became Kareem, he was Lou Alcindor.
Yes.
So there's in real life a name change that he went through.
Well, and I feel like there's a couple other layers too, right? Like just to put what I have here, right? You've got the comment on celebrity cameos in movies, which we mentioned. There's the fact that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is doing sort of an intentionally stilted performance.
Mm-hmm.
And then also the fact that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the character, is like getting mad at the kid. And then there's also all of the like in-world implications of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar moonlighting incognito as an airline pilot. Like there's so many questions then that naturally leads to.
He got a taste of the sky, Josh, and he can't let go.
Were you ever like a Lakers fan or anything like that, Bernie, or into basketball in any way?
No, baseball was more my sport that I was into, and it was
Mets.
The Mets. Yep.
Let's go Mets, baby.
Oh no.
Oh no. Oh God. It's a Mets podcast.
Yeah,
it's a Mets podcast.
We're not going to talk about the movie anymore. This is all going to be about the
activated
Mets.
something horrible inside of me. Spring training starts in 2 weeks. Let's go. Yes. So look, this feels like as good of a time to take our break as any, because now I'm just thinking about the Mets and I'm going to need to take a sort of walk around the apartment to cool down from that exciting revelation.
We'll put
Bernie,
this on pause then.
If it turned out that you were a Yankees fan, I'd have to kick you off at the break. No, we'll get back to it. We're going to really talk about a whole lot of other fun gags, some more goofy stuff, and maybe even a return of a famous segment on our show that you know and love. So,
wait, what segment? What segment?
Choo-choo, worst of all possible worlds, listeners. The One Train here, servicing 242nd Street to South Ferry. Except for all the times that I don't. I've been noticing some, let's say, interesting behavior by the riders who hop inside me lately, and wanted to take this opportunity to go over some basic ground rules for when you want to trip the rails fantastic. Number 1, Dan is no longer permitted to ride the subway. You know what you did, Dan. Number 2, please don't climb on top of me and ride me like Spider-Man. Didn't you see what I did to Spider-Man when he tried to stop me in the movie? I almost tore him clean in two. So, please don't make me turn you into a bisexual. Number 3, please stand away from the platform edge. I don't want to squish you. I say it so often, but do you listen? No. It's like you want to be squished. Is that what you want? Do you want me to squish you? I'm sorry, listeners. I know I sound snippy. It's been a hard century. When I was younger, I could make turns with ease. My switches were new. My chrome was shiny and bright. But now, I'm getting older, and I'm terrified I might be decommissioned, or worse, become a G-train. Or that maybe it's all more trouble than it's worth. The endless days of doing the same loop over and over makes me wonder why I even still do this. But then sometimes, a few weeks ago I was going over the Broadway Bridge, my normal route, staring down the end of another long, endless night of carting starving artists home from their terrible barista jobs in Times Square, when suddenly this woman, this, by all accounts, very drunk woman, fresh off what one assumes was one of the karaoke bars in Midtown, starts singing loud and shrill, no music behind her, yet somehow off-key, about how terrible her day was, how her partner had just left her, how the world seemed dead set on grinding her dreams into dust, and some people tried to offer her money. Pretty par for the course. But this woman waved it all away and screamed, saying, "I don't want your money. I just needed you all to know how awful my day was," and vanished into the next car, like a ghost in the night. A silence hung in the air for a time, until an older passenger, sitting alone at the end of the car, leaned forward and in a clean, ringing baritone sang, "Ain't no sunshine when she's gone." The car erupted in laughter, and suddenly it was like a spell had been broken. All the unspoken rules of the subway, keep your head down, plug in your headphones, tune out, just faded away. And something new and exciting and wonderful took their place. Two men on opposite ends of the car, both wearing Mets hats, held up their fists and screamed, "Go Mets!" with all the infectious optimism of the first passengers on the Titanic. Strangers introduced themselves to each other as more and more people joined in with the older man's song. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. The lights of the New York skyline glistened in the distance, and for a brief and beautiful moment, the true beating heart of this city revealed itself inside a tiny subway car. My tiny subway car. And that, I think, is kind of a miracle. That, I think, makes the endless loop worth traveling. I will make that loop for as long as I am able. All I ask in return is one simple request. Please stand away from the platform edge.
So I've been thinking lately about closing doors, and I've been thinking about standing in them and just continuing to stand in them. This is, I think, what I'm going to be trying to do in the new year. This is my resolution, is just to stand in the way of closing doors. Yes.
No. I think we've been told explicitly several times a very specific phrase.
Okay.
But I have to tell you, that is not me that says that phrase on the subway.
Okay.
There are many voices on
where
these
credit
trains.
is due, and that is not me.
Okay.
There was a conductor I had once on the J train where they just, the conductor comes on and says it, unless they're newer trains that have an automated system. He figured out the perfect way of boiling down the phrase "stand clear of the closing doors" to its absolute essence. And he just said, "Stagnors."
That's even better than, I remember I had a subway driver and I thought that he had condensed it pretty well, which was clear the closed doors, please. But
I wonder if it was the same guy, just like a couple years apart. Yeah.
The first thing that I just wanted to frame up here is the ongoing conflict between Elaine and Ted. Now, we will remember, of course, Ted Stryker. He is our main protagonist, veteran pilot in War TK. It's kind of like an intentionally pastiche kind of thing.
Yeah,
and
a lot of his flashbacks are to like flying machines from like the early 1910s.
Yes. And then, of course, Elaine, his flight attendant girlfriend, when they're actually on the plane, they have another opportunity to sort of reconcile. And we get this.
I know things haven't been right for a long time, Ellen. But it'll be different. Like it was in the beginning, remember?
I remember everything. It's all I've ever had to go on.
This isn't right. This doesn't sound quite right.
The nights when we were together. I remember how you used to hold me. And then afterwards how we'd watch until the sun finally came up.
No, sorry, stop that one, Brian. This isn't quite how I remember it.
Okay.
Can you play the next clip?
I know things haven't been right for a long time.
There
but
we
it'll
go.
Be different. Like it was in the beginning, remember?
I remember everything.
Clip 0
All
hour.
I have are memories. Mostly I remember the nights when we were together. I remember how you used to hold me. How I used to sit on your face and wriggle, and afterwards how we'd watch until the sun came up. When it did, it was almost like each new day was created only for us.
They will take the whole thing, which is so bad and so cheesy in the original writing, but then they put one little spike in there that makes you like perk up. And in this case, I would sit on your face.
Yeah, and then it's immediately discarded like it was never said at all.
I don't know, I'm curious, Bernie, like, have you ever done any like comedic roles or anything like that where you sort of have to be deadpan? Because I feel like it could be in your wheelhouse. I'm just curious if it's something that you have experience with or not.
I've had very little experience. A few times, though, I've done live performances, including I did a bit that was kind of a comedy show that I was being the moderator for this comedy show. And I was supposed to be the straight man for it. But I found ways to inject some humor, which the audience seemed to very much enjoy. So I'm a terrible joke teller, but it's more situational. At the moment, I'll find something humorous and comment on it, as opposed to, oh, let me tell you about the joke of, I can't do those.
Right.
But in the moment, I can sometimes be funny. And I've done that. I did that with a few live podcast performances in front of audiences. So I feel pretty comfortable. I think a big part of that is not being scared. And I've reached the point in my career where I'm not that nervous when I'm in front of a live audience. So that, I think, makes a big difference too. But I don't think I would do well as a stand-up. That would not be my...
It is interesting that usually for like movies like this, you throw in like a seasoned comedian, like a seasoned stand-up into the mix of the cast. But I mean, pretty much across the board, they just used very serious actors. None more so than Leslie Nielsen, who is probably like the most famous actor post this movie. Like, this is what really launches his comedy career for the rest of his life.
Yeah, he keeps working with ZAZ specifically on Police Squad, The Naked Gun, Scary Movie 3. I think he starts to fall a little bit more into mugging and shtick, but here he plays it the way that people would know Leslie Nielsen. He plays it very straight. He had done a little bit of comedy before this, like he had done an episode of MASH, but his character was not a funny character in that episode of MASH. I know Leslie Nielsen, if not for this, which of course I grew up with, for his dramatic roles. The thing that comes to my head first is Forbidden Planet.
He has a kind of acting that I can only really describe as like Columbo acting. There's just something about like this very sort of 70s serious deadpan where there's just a gravitas behind like every single line that I don't think is really present in modern acting so much. It makes you believe them up until the point where your brain hears what they're saying.
Yeah. There's a few more of these little pastiche kind of silly flashback moments. There's like the war hospital where Ethel Merman shows up.
In her last film role.
Yes.
And again, this, because I saw this movie as a kid, I had no idea who Ethel Merman was. This was my introduction to Ethel Merman as a concept.
Oh, wow.
And little did I know how important she would become to me.
And of course, we've also got the transplant patient en route who keeps on getting her IV knocked out as this nice stewardess like sings and plays a guitar. And of course, we have the slightly racist bit where they are selling Tupperware and teaching basketball to indigenous people.
Yeah.
Just want to throw all of these out there in case anybody had any comments on any of these sort of little bits.
It is funny how like sprawling these flashbacks are. It's like, oh yeah, there was my time in the service. And then it's like, I don't know, he lives out the plot of The English Patient or something. Like there's just so many different things that they're up to in the past until I guess very recently. And it's like, where did this come from? I don't even know exactly what they're even parodying at this point anymore, other than just they had an idea for a scene where, he's trying to teach some people in Africa basketball and they're just inherently good at it.
That bit is one of the bits that feels the most Kentucky Fried Movie, both for better and for worse. But like the whole idea of dancing around the boundaries of good taste was a big part of like what they were trying to do as Kentucky Fried Theater. And this is carrying that tradition through. What's weird, though, is that it feels out of place in this movie more than anything else.
Yeah, I think it veers too far away from the war as far as like the flashbacks go. It's just like now they're in Africa for some reason.
Right, because we had to fill another couple minutes because the Saturday Night Fever parody didn't go on for 11 minutes.
We needed a third suicide attempt, right? So because we had the old lady hanging herself, we had James Hong in one of his 1,000 credits committing suicide.
Oh my God, that was James
himself.
And then the third guy is a white guy who is a
dressed
former
as a
member
Sikh,
of dressed as a Sikh guy in full brown face. There's some issues with this movie from time to time. You know, it's a product of its time.
I do think that the self-immolating part is the funniest of the three gags, right?
Yes,
someone just pouring more and more gasoline on himself, and he's just about to strike the match.
Well, it is interesting because, you know, the two black men in the film that speak jive, right? Like, and that is sort of a recurring bit throughout the whole thing. It's actually really just an excuse of like to have a white woman attempt to speak.
Yeah, well,
not just a white woman.
The mom from Leave It to Beaver.
Right.
Oh, really? Oh, shit.
Barbara Billingsley.
Yeah. Yep. Getting Barbara Billingsley specifically to say just hang loose, blood was, I think, the entire purpose of that joke. But you can I think you can tell that they're trying to do sort of racialized humor, but then also trying to pare it back so that it's not, they're trying to make it inoffensive. They don't succeed entirely.
No, especially the basketball stuff.
That is definitely the vibration that they are going for. They're just trying to do sort of a silly joke.
And to sort of bring in just another genre that was popular at the time. Like, you know, it's the blaxploitation stuff, right? It is sort of like they're trying to throw every kind of movie and every just wild, like comedic thought into the same thing.
I don't recall, and I wasn't paying attention to it at the time, but what was the contemporary reaction to that? Sure. You know, not looking at it from 2024, but what was the reaction in 1980 or 81 when the movie came out, and how did people feel about it then?
I feel like it, as opposed to Kentucky Fried Movie, which was pretty controversial, I don't think that anybody was especially up in arms about any of this stuff in Airplane. I mean, ultimately, like, a white guy teaches a bunch of African people who have never seen a basketball before how to play basketball, quote unquote, and they're all naturally good at it. It's a lazy joke. I don't know that it's like offensive, exactly. Like it's not like
it's not a disgusting
offensive
joke.
No, it's just like it's lazy.
And the Tupperware joke is more a joke about Tupperware than anything. Correct. It's like, oh yeah, we were bringing all of these life-saving whatever, and then it's just a Tupperware party, like,
which is actually kind of a funny commentary on like NGO culture.
Exactly.
And like, anyway, just little bits and pieces that I wanted to talk about that are ultimately not particularly salient to the plot of the film, because the plot of the film
doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter either, but it does give us an excuse to meet Leslie Nielsen's character, Dr. Rumack. Now, again, we talked about how up until this point, Leslie Nielsen, known as a dramatic leading man. And Bernie, were you like following Leslie Nielsen up until this point? Had you seen the other stuff he was in at all?
This was the first time I became aware of Leslie Nielsen. So in my mind, he's always been.
So I would actually not say he was really a leading man. I mean, he was in Forbidden Planet, but he moved over to TV, and so he was a guy who would show up on Mannix or Route 66 or Night Gallery or something.
So one of those guys who shows up and you're like, oh, hey, it's that
Yeah, he
guy.
shows up
like
and he's like a general or a detective or something,
I think it's easily the most memorable thing about this movie.
It really set him up, I think, for the Naked Gun movies, and even more so for Police Squad, which was a summer fill-in show that I thought was one of the funniest TV shows I had ever seen. I loved Police Squad and how they, again,
in color,
played around with genres. Yes, in color. But how they played around with all the tropes of different things, primarily from older TV shows and films, not contemporary, but I think his name was Johnny, the shoeshine boy, and how that was something that you would have seen in 40s movies and things like that.
Police Squad is a particular obsession of Josh's as well.
That's right.
I think, and it's true. Like, it's fun that they got to make some Naked Gun movies after that. They're not as good as Police Squad. Correct. Which I think also because they had Joe Dante with them, I think he added a sort of Looney Tunes capacity to all of that. And the fast pace and the fact that it's just going to be, 25 minutes at most really sells everything. And I just can't get enough of those freeze frame jokes at the end of every episode of Police Squad.
It almost feels like he's a wind up doll for the id of the directors of this movie that they've just sort of unleashed upon the script.
And again, just talking about the complexity of putting these scenes together. This one, they're not doing anything special with the camera or anything. Well, except at the very end. But like, this whole scene where he's explaining the symptoms, this very famous scene, is all done in one single take. And so it starts with him lining everything up, right? And as he's lining it up, you see Captain Over slowly experiencing each symptom in real time. It's very stagey. right? It's something that they figured out how to time perfectly. You can't use an editor to time it. It has to happen right there. And then, of course, it ends with the plane about to crash because he keels over on the stick and starts sending it into a nosedive. The class of delivery of it and just the expertise of both of these, or all three of these dramatic actors in this scene, it's just exactly what it needs to be, and it must have taken an incredible amount of work to get it done right.
It would be so hard for me as an actor to ignore all of that happening, like right in my peripheral vision, while I'm just trying to list these symptoms, and this man is giving this incredible comedic performance, like mere inches from me. When he spits up at like half, like I think it's like the 8th or 9th symptom that he's listed.
So he has to have that. He's been holding that in the whole take.
The whole scene!
Yes.
Just some like lukewarm oatmeal. I don't know if you've ever had to do any vomiting scenes. I've had to do my fair share in the day. And I don't like oatmeal either.
Yeah, how many vomiting scenes have you had to do in your traffic reporting career?
0.
Oh, okay.
Maintain that record. It's not worth it.
We find out that there were 2 meal options on this plane for the in-flight dinner, right? Fish and steak. Everybody who ate fish has already gotten or is going to get sick. This, of course, includes the pilots. And once Captain Over is down for the count, Elaine, our flight attendant, calls flight control.
This is Elaine Dickinson. I'm the stewardess. Captain Over's passed out on the floor and we've lost the co-pilot and navigator too. We're in terrible trouble. Over.
Roger, Elaine. Roger, I read you. This is Steve McCroskey at Chicago Air Control.
Back to you in a minute. Hold all takeoffs. I don't want another plane in the air. When the 508 reports, bring it straight in. Yes, sir. Put out a general bulletin to suspend all meal service on flights out of Los Angeles. Tell all dispatchers to remain at the post. It's going to be a long night. How about some coffee, Johnny?
No thanks.
I want the weather on every landing field this side of the runway, no matter what the size. You understand? Any place where there's a chance to land that plane. Stan, go upstairs to the tower and get a runway diagram. Terry, check down the field for emergency equipment.
Chief, we got fog right down to the deck. Every place east of the Rockies. There's no possible place they can land. They'll have to come through to Chicago.
Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit smoking. I want the best available man on this. The man who knows that plane inside and out and won't crack under pressure.
How about Mr. Rogers?
Brian briefly enters the movie.
Again, these are dramatic actors. They're TV actors. They're people you can give them just a lot of dialogue, a lot of really dry stuff that doesn't really mean anything, and they can just deliver it. And that's what you need for this scene.
This is Lloyd Bridges?
Of the famous Bridges family, you know, Jeff and others.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
he's their dad.
Oh, there's a lot of Bridgeses out there.
Well, what's incredible about this movie also is that they just keep setting up dishes to spin. Like you think at a certain point they're going to run out of bits, so they're going to stop setting up like ongoing bits. But no, they just keep adding dishes.
Yeah, and we got that Mr. Rogers line at the end, and that is Steve Zucker. So we got Zucker, and Stucker now, who is another Kentucky Fried Theater guy.
Absolute gem. By all accounts, when we lost him far too soon to AIDS.
Yeah, he is breaking the rules, right? Everyone else delivers everything as clean and as dramatic and as straight-faced as possible. He comes in, goofy face, goofy voice, very physical, prancing around,
everything,
mincing.
Apparently.
Well, not ad-libbing, though. He is... They gave him the script and he wrote his own lines. So he's not necessarily surprising the actors with what he's going to say, but they are all his words.
Again, Steven Stucker, I had never seen that I can recall before this film. But Lloyd Bridges was certainly familiar from the various TV dramas.
Were you a Sea Hunt fan?
No, I was not.
Hate snorkels as a rule, really.
And, Steve, keep in mind, this is, I believe, before the AIDS crisis began. And I guess I was still pretty naive, because I think of Paul Lynde from Bewitched.
A favorite subject of ours on this show.
But actors who were playing, in a sense, gay characters that in my early viewing of this, I think it probably went over, Paul Lynde certainly went over my head when I was watching Bewitched. And I'm not sure how I reacted to Steven Stucker, but it was obviously unspoken. And how that would have upset some people in the audience back in 1980.
This is so interesting to me that we have a visibly queer character who exists as an agent of chaos in this world, right? Very
Right.
deliberately so. And in a way that makes it so much better and so much more fun. And the fact that he is really being, I think in many ways, like unabashedly himself, right?
Yeah.
In a world where I think all of these other people are segmented into the little boxes of gender and the performance that is required of them in this context, right? I find that fascinating and sort of a bizarrely radical thing coming from ZAZ, who, as we've talked about, are pretty conservative overall in their outlook in politics.
Well, and it's interesting because there are some jokes that are aimed squarely at conservatives here. In 1980, Ronald Reagan being president at the very beginning of all that, like someone makes a joke. I haven't felt this bad since I saw that Ronald Reagan movie. But you can get away with that again because it's a joke about Reagan as an actor, and everyone knew that. Yeah, he kind of sucks. And then they do the win one for the Gipper bit towards the end of the film. There's also a little joke. I don't know if anyone caught it where. They're talking about how bad it is. And they said, I haven't seen something like this since the Anita Bryant concert. And Anita Bryant was this virulently homophobic singer who did advertising for Florida Oranges until she got a pie in her face from a radical gay activist. And then everyone was like, why did a pie get thrown into her face? And then it turned out that's when sort of the mainstream culture found out about her evangelical organizational ties and her vicious homophobia. So it's interesting to see those little jokes in there and to see Zucker, who, he's not necessarily playing a gay character as much as like, that's just him. He's not someone who can really butch it up. He's going to deliver those lines that way because that's how he talks. That's who he is. And for a lot of people, I think it's just going to go over their heads.
Yeah, I would argue that this is a point in the movie where you need that sort of injection of energy in order to like sustain the rest of it. Because if it were deadpan all the way through, if every single character were exactly like that, I don't necessarily know if it would feel as quick as it does.
Bring him in because he's not
in.
there from the beginning either, right? Yeah, you're keeping from getting too monotonous by throwing him in that third act.
I was thinking as you were talking a little bit about him, I can't imagine them having had a trans character back in 1980.
Right.
They maybe would have a drag character or something like that, but not a trans character.
And I feel like if there had been a drag character, it would have been played entirely for laughs and not in the fun way. I think that's part of why the character of Johnny is so striking to me.
It's their old friend who they probably considered to be the funniest guy in their group.
Right.
Being able to make his own jokes here and knocking every single one out of the park.
Yes.
Basically a demon. Like,
So in order to land this plane, right, now that the two pilots are out of commission.
And the navigator, whatever he does.
We're going to have to figure out a way to land this plane, right?
The big matter here is, of course, that no one can fly this plane. But there is one man who might be able to fly the plane.
Might be able to. And so the doctor has a heart-to-heart with Elaine.
Well, Janet, you're a member of this crew. Can you face some unpleasant facts?
I think so.
All right. Unless I can get all these people to a hospital quickly, I can't even be sure of saving their lives.
I don't understand. What is it?
There's something toxic in that food tonight. Some kind of bacteria poison.
How did it
Wait, hold on. This
is a ways. That's not important. What is important? These people need hospital facilities. Stimulants, intravenous treatment for shock.
But the pilots. How are we going to land?
Is there anybody else on board who can land this plane?
There's no one on board from the airline. I don't know about anybody else.
How many passengers are there?
38.
I think you ought to know what our chances are. The life of everybody aboard depends on just one thing. Finding someone back there who not only can fly this plane, but who didn't have fish for dinner.
Sorry, that's not quite right.
Elaine, you're a member of this crew.
There we
go. Can you face some unpleasant facts?
No.
All right. Unless I get all those people to a hospital quickly, I can't even be sure of saving their lives. Now, is there anyone on board who can land this plane?
No, no one I know of.
I think you ought to know what our chances are. The life of everyone on board depends upon just one thing. Finding someone back there who can not only fly this plane, but who didn't have fish for dinner.
They sell it a lot better in an airplane.
They really do.
What a profound waste of everyone's time, Josh. How dare you?
The stewardess said
both pilots.
Can you fly this plane and land it?
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Doctor, I've checked everyone. Mr. Stryker's the only one.
What flying experience have you had?
Well, I flew single-engine fighters in the Air Force, but this plane has 4 engines. It's an entirely different kind of flying, altogether.
It's an entirely different kind of flying.
There we go.
To have that right next to the first "Don't Call Me Shirley" is
unbelievable.
What a run.
Yeah.
You do start to get diminishing returns on the gags. Not this one, because this is one of the best quotes in the whole movie. But the silliness is so relentless, and you're seeing different versions of the same kind of thing over and over and over again. But this is also a problem with Airport, where it's like, okay, we get it. Land the fucking plane, you know?
And Airport has almost no jokes except for Helen Hayes.
Right.
And every time Helen Hayes is on, you're like, oh, thank God. A part of the movie that's not good still, but like still kind of enjoyable.
She saves it.
Yeah.
You know?
There's a point where Rex Kramer, who is sort of the pilot that is in charge of guiding Stryker to guide the plane to the ground, he is getting ready in his home while a guy is being mauled by his dog in the background, and you're made to think that he's looking in a mirror and adjusting his shirt, but then he walks fully through the mirror, and it's just been a doorway this whole time, and his wife looks like, where did the mirror go? And as he's driving to the air traffic control center, the green screen around
the
him,
rear projection.
I don't think
it's rear projection. Yeah,
it's the rear projector behind him. It's just going nuts.
It's like first it's like way wrong. It's like on the bottom of the car, but it's showing like above the car. You know, so that makes them look like they're tiny. And then they hit a bicyclist.
He hits a guy.
And then it's just zigzagging back and forth.
And then they're driving away from guys on horseback.
Yeah, they're like driving away from the cavalry from some old stock footage that they found. There's not a whole lot of like meta jokes in Airplane, and I think that's part of why it works so well is because they knew they had to limit that. You can't just be Olsen and Johnson and make the whole movie into Hellzapoppin', even though you're imitating the pacing and insanity of Hellzapoppin'. You can't just be making every joke about how this is a movie.
And I feel like as we get to the back half, they start relying on that a little bit more and more because then they start having people appear from the sky.
Well, they're using the tools of making movies by, having someone just appear upside down or something like that. But they're not making jokes about it being a movie, about rear projection or...
Yeah, this is not Blazing Saddles.
Yeah.
Remember Captain Over, airline pilot with some unfortunate predilections?
Sure, yeah.
Well, it turns out that his wife is having an affair, and I think the best way that we can cover this affair is to return to a famous segment.
Hey, I'm sorry, what's that? AJ's Horse Corner. So we cut to a scene where the wife is in bed and she wakes up and there's also a horse in the bed with her. And she tells the horse, you can leave through the back door and that there's juice in the fridge. And here's what I'm going to say about this horse. First of all, this horse is played by a horse.
Live. It's a live horse. They had to build a gigantic bed for this.
For this horse. The horse's name is Windy, which everyone knows it's Windy. This horse looks cozy as fuck. This horse is entering her horseshoe me era in a huge way. This is the kind of horse that just got into a big fight with her husband.
Got my finger over the button.
Is pretending to sleep, but can't because she feels guilty about saying the wrong thing. She knows that it would be the easiest thing in the world to just roll over and apologize, but she can't bring herself to do it. She pulls the sheets up around her face, clinging onto them for some semblance of normalcy, but finds none.
AJ, where are you going with this?
This isn't something they just come back from. The air has shifted forever. The long simmering tensions finally given voice and a name, and it terrifies her. To be lying in bed next to someone, but feel so completely alone. It's hell. She feels him shift and move, his hand tentatively touching her face. Are you okay? He asks. She turns to face him and says, this has been AJ's Horse Corner.
Ooh, yeah.
AJ's Horse Corner.
I'm so glad that we got to have this esteemed guest hear you just going on about this fucking horse for like 2 minutes. Thank you, AJ.
One of the best playwrights in New York, everybody.
Have you done any episodes about Mr. Ed or the Godfather scene?
Yeah. No, this horse is alive. We have to be very clear.
Yes.
This horse is alive. This is not just a horse head.
It's so,
which would it be an entirely different
yeah, because
conversation.
otherwise people will just think it's the Godfather scene. You have to make sure the horse moves in order for the gag to work, which is an insane conversation to have.
Yeah. No.
Especially when you
No, this works for me on many levels, Brian.
I know it works for you.
This isn't about you, AJ.
I would really rather it was never about you again.
They're going to get through it. They're going to be okay.
My favorite bit from sort of this piece before they successfully manage to, land the plane is the news broadcasts that go over the waves where there's like this montage of like newspaper headlines and then guys on the news. There's this broadcast, and this is also a Kentucky Fried Movie reference, where this guy comes out on what is, I guess, a point counterpoint,
which was a real show.
Panel show.
A real show, yeah.
At the end of 60 Minutes.
Yep. And he has this take on the situation. This is clip 12.
Shane, they bought their tickets. They knew what they were getting into. I say, let them crash.
I also want to say about Mr. Kramer, who's coming in to help guide this plane down. That's Robert Stack. That's Mr. Unsolved Mysteries himself. And this is something that he did after doing Airplane, but like this is speaking to, again, they're looking for gravity. They're looking for excellent voiceover artists. They're looking for someone who just brings nothing but seriousness to what he's doing and then just layering the ridiculous things on top of him, like a pair of sunglasses on a pair of sunglasses on Robert Stack.
Yes. They actually said that they would not do the movie without him.
Wow.
Like,
really?
They sent his agent the script and said, we really want him to do this role. And the agent said, do you have any money? And they said, no. And the agent said, come back when you have money. And he took some convincing, but he also apparently struggled a lot with the not having a motivation thing for his character, but eventually really tapped into the vibe of what this movie was about. Again, I think it came the easiest to Leslie Nielsen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like he from day one knew what this was and knew
Leslie
how to get
Nielsen was always like a really ridiculous guy. Like he for many years, even before Airplane, had this little electronic device that played a little fart sound.
Yeah,
and he had a remote
machine,
control for it. So like if someone came into the room, he'd like put it somewhere in the room and then hit the fart button and blame it on somebody else. Like he was waiting for this. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. His gravestone says, "Let her rip." He was just trapped doing like Route 66 and Forbidden Planet for like 30 years. And then he was finally able to break out as this absolute clown that he is.
And I guess this is also the part in the movie where they really lean the most into like the machismo of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where they're like, we're big, strong flight control guys.
Yeah.
We're going to make it all happen. Also, the way that when they're up in the flight control tower, preparing to like see the plane come into land, the whole thing is staged like they're in a war movie waiting for the enemy to attack.
Which also effectively increases the dramatic tension of those scenes. You got the glue sniffing, you've got the paranoia, no, don't turn on the lights just yet. That's exactly what they're expecting. And all of that actually does ratchet this up far better than 0 Hour did.
But again, within all of that, Johnny exists in there as the chaos agent, right?
Bad news. The fog is getting thicker.
And Leon's getting larger.
It's just so much of Johnny is me and is my spirit. Like I just absorbed this character as a child and I was like, yes, you could make a hat or a brooch or a pterodactyl out of so many things. The way that he types too, it's all just magic.
Typing. It's like he's attacking every single key.
There's also like they're dancing. His fingers are dancing while also horribly maiming those keys. It's violent.
There are things that people who are younger may have gone over their heads in terms of things. And also how things change.
Yeah.
For instance, the beginning scene where Ted drives the taxi to the airport and gets out and says, I'll be right back.
Sets the meter.
Puts the flag down. The guy who's sitting in the back seat is a guy by the name of Howard Jarvis, who was in the news back then because he had put forth a referendum in California for taxes. So that was his thing, and he just waits there. And another thing that I picked up on was just, all the airlines, when you're seeing the outside of the airport, Eastern, TWA, these airlines that no longer exist, smoking sections on airplanes that, no, what do you mean that? A smoking section on an airplane?
That's wild to me.
Or having, people just sort of freely going in and out of the cockpit, the pilot leaves and he's just walking around in the back.
And even the job title, stewardess, which, back then everybody was female who was a flight attendant. They didn't call them flight attendants. They called them stewardesses. So all these little things. And the only product placement I noticed was, I think, Coke and Tab.
Oh, in Miller High Life. There were bottles of Miller High Life.
Yes,
but it was fun seeing Tab. And you're like, I know exactly when I am in time.
It was so nice being able to just have free reign in the airport. When my first flight, there was absolutely no security that you went to.
Wow.
You got your ticket and you walked right onto the plane. So it wasn't even the magnetometer that they show in that one scene where the guy has to take off his metal arm and his metal leg to go through. Not even that existed. But obviously before 9/11, you had a pared down type of security that was in place before the TSA was created. So, I certainly miss the innocence of those things. But on the other hand, I also remember at that time, there would be at least one or two commercial plane crashes that happened every year. And, you don't hear about those for the most part anymore.
Although Boeing is trying its best to bring it back.
They're trying to bring it back.
It's new Coke. It's coming back.
Also, speaking of drinks, wanted to bring up one little gag that happens towards the beginning of the movie with a husband and wife on the plane, and the husband gets a second cup of coffee. And the wife has this voiceover that says, he never gets a second cup of coffee at home.
Right.
That was a famous ad campaign throughout the 70s for many years for Ubon coffee.
Yeah, and that the same actress was in the commercials.
It's actually her. They actually got the actress from the commercial to be in Airplane.
When they start landing, I did pull a third clip here of the doctor. Let me see if we can just roll that real quick.
I just want to tell you both good luck. I'll keep your son with me.
Thank you.
Wait, that's not the line. That's not the line. Hold on.
No!
I just want to tell you both good luck. We're all counting on you.
There we go.
Gotta say,
he can't keep getting away with it.
Gotta say, the original line is funnier. I'll keep your son with me.
I know. It's so weird.
They probably tried it, right? But him saying it 3 times made him a little bit too close.
Well, they don't
to
have
Captain
a son
Over.
in Airplane. There's a son in Zero Hour. Because they're Canadian in 0 Hour and they have kids earlier.
That's just how it is up there.
Okay.
It's just a known fact.
But yeah, the plane begins its final descent after that. Just want to say good luck. We're all counting on you, which rule of threes, that repeats 3 times, once during the flight and once after they've already landed. We've talked about this from so many angles now. And I guess here's a question that I have just in general. Comedy is this weird thing, right? It tends to not age well, but I think it's fair to say that in many ways, this movie has?
Yeah.
I mean, how do we feel that this movie has held up 44 years after its initial release?
It's crazy, especially considering how much of it is like references and using actors that you know from a certain context. There's something about just the musicality of it, too. For me, it's almost like it's not even a funny movie anymore. It's just like, oh, yeah, this is the next line that comes because I have seen it so many times. And if it's ever on, I'll just keep watching it.
Like I say, I watched it today. And it was the first time I've seen it in years. So there was, I hadn't seen it. It reminded me of things that I had forgotten. But it also was enough of, I'm really paying close attention and I'm using the pause button to see things that I probably missed in earlier versions of it.
There are so many jokes in this that land so well. I mean, pun intended, that like really do land the plane that I feel like it is so worth still revisiting. I think Bill Hader talked about watching this movie and how there was like when he was a kid, he loved, and Don't Call Me Shirley and all that. But now he just loves fucking Kramer ranting about municipal bonds. It's like, you'll be hit in the head with a hammer. Of course, that never happens. Like that's sort of like,
forget that, Ted. What the hell am I talking about?
What am I talking about? Yeah, I know. like you gravitate onto the different levels of the comedy the older you get, and revisiting it, there's so much gold here. Like you understand why people consider this like the funniest movie of all time, and that so many different kinds of people with so many different kinds of comedic sensibilities can all find something in this movie that they're like, that's my sense of humor.
And I think the time I watched it this time was the first time I was really paying attention to how different things are now compared with then. Like the men were all wearing suits on the plane, which you never see anybody wearing a suit anymore on a plane. You know, little things like that. Even little things like the credit card machine when they were at the airport and he put the old credit card machine up
to take the physical embossing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I did feel like Kevin McAllister in Home Alone 2 Lost in New York when I saw him use the credit card and go, oh, wow, it works.
I just got a new debit card this last weekend and it no longer has the raised numbers on it. Ooh. And I'm so kind of upset.
I was going to say, and just from a personal perspective, when I was in college, I remember working at a Radio Shack and we would use those. And the way we would find out if the credit card was valid, there was a book that came out like every week. And you'd have to look at this 2-point type to see the credit card numbers and make sure that it wasn't one of the ones that was on the list of a stolen credit card.
Wow. So it was a compendium of every credit card number in circulation.
Of every
bad credit card number.
Every bad credit card. So, yeah.
Well, did Slam and Tab in the back of that Radio Shack help or hurt with finding the false credit cards?
I feel like this is as good of an opportunity as any, Bernie, to say thank you so much for coming on. I mean, this has been unbelievably fun.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me.
If folks want to see what it is that you're up to, what should they do?
If you type my name, I am the only Bernie Wagenblast as far as I know in the world. So, and that's wagon with an E, not an O. So if you do that, you'll find me wherever. You know, I'm on places like TikTok and Instagram, but very little involvement there.
You are much more on TikTok than any of us are, except maybe Josh.
I'm very on TikTok, actually.
Josh is our Gen Z member
that's right.
of the podcast, so he has to be tapped into that.
And now I'm mainly on TikTok just to see what other people are doing. It's the main reason that I'm there. And maybe once in a while to respond to something that somebody has done. But that's about it.
Also, I will say I did listen to a couple episodes of your podcasts, and if you are not super into like what is going on in the world of transport, it might not be up your alley, but let me tell you something.
Considering the fans that we have, they are into transport.
If you like thinking about, highways and the ways that we can build better infrastructure and wildlife crossings over highways and how block grants can be applied to fund more sustainable and equitable development of our logistical resources, boy howdy have I got some podcasts for you. So check that out. It's all in the show notes.
We'll get them all linked.
And thank you again for spending some time with us.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been fun. I've had a lot of fun.
I should also just take a chance here to say, if you've been enjoying our show, we do have a Patreon.
That's right.
$5 a month gets you access to our whole back catalog, plus occasional Bobus episodes, as well as Fancy Movie Time with Brian and AJ, where they talk about fancy movies.
Movies that are not like this one at all.
No, not even a little bit. So patreon.com/worst of all is where you'll find that. And AJ, do you want to take us home?
Yeah. So the thing I found most striking about watching Airplane is that this is just not a style of comedy that's made too much anymore. As Brian mentioned, Angie Tribeca is certainly playing in the same sort of field, but this kind of movie has really gone out of style. Back in the day, back when it was being made, when they initially pitched this project, it was something that no one had really ever seen before, and people didn't really know if it would work at all. I mean, every actor who read it was like, what is this? And like some of the actors who did it ended up throwing the script across the room the first time they read it and saying, this is garbage. But clearly they were proven wrong. The movie went on to be a huge success. It's a movie we're still talking about 40 years later. And I think 44 years later. And I think the lesson that we can draw from this is that if you want to make a great comedy, all you have to do is give us something completely different altogether.
Give us something completely different.
I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes. See you next week.